Food waste is made up of organic compounds. That means, in general, a complex molecule containing many different elements, including carbon. In its whole form, these molecules are no good to the soil, but as they decay, they break down into elements like nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, and minerals that are essential for growing plants. Now, in a normal composting operation, it can take months for materials to break down into elements. You start with organic material. As it starts to decompose, it gives off energy in the form of heat, sometimes as high as 150 degrees Fahrenheit. It can also give off energy in the form of gases, which in some cases can make the process smell and attract flies and rodents. Finally, after 6 months to a year, the material is broken down into its basic elements: nitrogen, potassium, phosphate, and so on. From there, the plant absorbs these materials through its root system and converts it into the enzymes and amino acids that it needs to live. Throughout this process, the compost is giving off energy, and that means it's losing nutrients. The end product has less nutrient content than the material you started with. The EM technology method of composting streamlines this process. It happens over a period of about 4 weeks, start to finish, so you see the benefits much more quickly. In the first step, the material is fermented, which helps preserve it. This fermenting process takes about 2 weeks. It may help to think of a cucumber. If you leave it sitting out on a shelf, it will rot and start to smell in a couple of days. But if you put it in a jar of vinegar, it turns into a pickle and will stay fresh for months. Once the material is fermented, you dig it into the ground. Over the next 2 to 4 weeks, the compost will break down, but there are some big differences. The entire process from here only takes 2 to 4 weeks. No significant heat or gases are produced, meaning very little energy is used up in the process. Since very little energy is used during the process, the EM compost has a much higher level of nutrients than the traditional method. Also, the material doesn't break down quite as much as it does in regular composting. What happens is that it breaks down into smaller molecules, like amino acids and enzymes, that the plant can use right away. These compounds stay together because of the fermenting process that happened in step 1. We're going to show you how to start a food waste recycling program in your own school and at home. We'll start with a home program, which will show you the basics of EM composting, and then talk about how to get a program running in your school. Composting with EM is a simple and down-to-earth process. First, you mix the kitchen waste with the compost starter. Second, you give the waste some time to ferment. And finally, you transfer the waste into the garden or planter. We'll go over each step in detail to get you started on the right path. You'll need 2 or more EM composters, or you can build your own using any 3 to 5 gallon plastic bucket. If you build your own, make sure it has the following features. First, an airtight lid. If too much air gets into it, it could spoil the process. The buckets will need a strainer or divider to separate the food waste from the liquid that will accumulate during this process at the bottom of the bucket, and it will need a spigot or valve to drain this liquid. You'll also need some EM Bokashi compost starter. You can make your own or purchase it from EM Technologies. Later on, we'll make Bokashi together. And of course, let's not forget your food waste. Just toss your leftovers and food waste into the bucket after each meal. If you have anything big like melon rinds or carrots, you can chop it up into small pieces, nothing bigger than the size of a golf ball. This will speed up the process. What kind of food can you put into the bucket? Well, just about anything you eat. Fruit, vegetables, cooked or uncooked meat, and fish, prepared foods, and dairy products like cheese. Never add any spoiled or moldy food items or any liquid such as milk or juice into the compost because it can spoil the batch. Don't add plastic, glass, styrofoam, aluminum foil, plastic wrap, soda cans, or paper products. When you're ready to start composting, spread a handful of EM Bokashi over the bottom of the pail. Next, add your food waste and coat it thoroughly with a layer of Bokashi. A good rule of thumb to follow is to add 1 handful of the compost starter for each inch of material in your bucket. Use more Bokashi during the summer or when treating high-protein foods such as meat, fish, and dairy products. Mix in the Bokashi every time you add garbage. You don't have to stir all the way to the bottom of the bucket. Just mix it with the garbage you've just added. You should end up with layers of each day's mixture in your bucket. If you're just tossing in a little waste, sprinkle a little of the bokashi over the top and give it a quick stir. Close the lid tightly every time you add waste to the bucket. Remember that EM needs an airtight environment to do its job. It's probably easiest to store the bucket right in the kitchen. If it's tucked away somewhere, it may be too hard to get to on a regular basis. Just make sure it's not in the direct sunlight. Keep adding new layers of garbage and the compost starter every day until the bucket is mostly full. During the fermentation process, liquid may collect at the bottom of the bucket. The amount collected will depend on the type of food waste you add to the bucket. Fruits and vegetables tend to release more moisture than other foods. It's important to drain this liquid frequently, at least every other day. You'll want to save this valuable liquid, which we call garbage juice. It can be used to fertilize your houseplants and garden and to control odors in drain systems. As a fertilizer, dilute it to a ratio of 1 to 1,000. This is equal to 1 teaspoon of garbage juice to 1 gallon of water. Pour it onto the ground surrounding the plant, not on the leaves themselves. You can also pour the undiluted solution down your sinks, drains, or toilets to prevent slime buildup and odors. Just be sure to use the EM garbage juice the same day you drain it. Otherwise, it could spoil. When the first bucket is full, store it away from the light for about 2 weeks. Get out your second bucket and start composting your fresh garbage in it. Remember, you'll want to keep draining the garbage juice every 2 to 3 days. After about 2 weeks, the first bucket should be done. The best way to tell if everything has worked out is by the smell. As you remove the lid, you should notice a sweet and sour, slightly acidic smell, like pickles. There may be some white mold or yeast growing on it. This is a good sign. If you notice a bad smell when you take off the lid, something has gone wrong. The mixture has putrefied. Some of the things that can cause this failure are not closing the lid tightly after every use or not having an airtight container, failure to drain the garbage juice often enough, not adding enough bokashi, using poor quality bokashi, adding spoiled foods to the compost, or too much exposure to sun or extreme temperatures. But for now, let's assume that everything went well and you have a good batch of fermented garbage. The final step is to transfer it to the garden or planter. There are several different ways to do this. In a new garden where nothing is planted, dig a hole 6 to 8 inches deep. Pour the contents of the bucket into the hole and mix it with the soil. Cover this with a 3-inch layer of just soil. You can also use a planter or container. Make sure you get one with drainage holes in the bottom. Start with a layer of gravel. This will help the drainage. Add 1/3 potting soil, 1/3 fermented food waste, and cover with 1/3 potting soil. Now with both of these methods, you will have to let the waste continue fermenting for at least 2 weeks before planting anything. Trenching is a good way to deal with a large amount of waste. Schools, restaurants, and businesses can use this method. Dig a trench 2 to 3 feet deep and 1 to 2 feet wide. Pour your waste into the trench and cover it with a layer of soil, about 6 inches. Keep adding layers until the trench is full. Wait a month to either plant directly on top of the trench, or you can dig out this super soil and use it in your planters or in your garden. You can also use the compost to fertilize existing gardens. You want to dig in between the beds 6 to 8 inches deep, keeping your hole about a foot away from the nearest plant. Add the fermented garbage, mix it with the dirt, and cover it all with 3 inches of soil. Make sure the roots of the plant don't touch the compost directly. For trees, dig holes about 1 foot deep around the drip line. This is under the end of the longest branches. Bury the fermented food waste in the holes and cover with 3 inches of soil. Again, make sure the roots do not come in direct contact with the compost. Now, what if something went wrong with the fermenting process and you end up with a gross, disgusting smelling bucket of garbage? Don't throw it away. You can still use it. Dig a hole 1 foot deep and away from trees and plants, or use a 10-gallon planter. Spread a ½ pound of bokashi in the bottom of the hole. If you're using a container, start with a layer of soil, then add the bokashi. Put in the contents of the spoiled bucket and add another ½ pound of bokashi. Finally, cover it with a layer of soil. In the summer, this will take about 2 weeks to break down, and about a month in the winter. In a new garden, wait about 2 weeks and plant your flowers or vegetables. Take care of them like you normally would. Make sure they get enough water and sunlight. Normally, they won't need any extra fertilizer with the EM compost in the soil. The EM compost helps develop a nutrient-rich soil that helps everything grow better. Flowers will grow bigger and last longer. When used to grow food, EM can increase crop yields, produce food that is more nutritious and tastes better, and food that even lasts longer once it's harvested. And all of this from a program designed to get rid of garbage.